Across time, I think it has become pretty obvious and pretty much recognized by all that Middle-earth, Tolkien's world, the one that The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, and all of his extended tales reside in, is one of the best out there, if not the clear best example of an intricate, unbelievably detailed world. From everything, from the description of the races to the description of single dams and single trees, everything is so well written. In The Lord of the Rings, everything is described to perfection, so that there are barely any issues to be found in his chronology. It's absolutely brilliant. It seems that there is no rock unturned in his world. Which, after giving you all of that information, might make the title of this video sound weird. Because why, after hearing that information, would you not want to write in a world like Tolkien's? If you're a new writer especially, who I'm mainly making this video about, why would you not want to make your world like that people are so invested in it that you literally have professional Tolkien experts? That is an actual job. I'm surprised by that. It's an amazing thing though. Imagine being a Tolkien expert as your full-time job. It would be brilliant. But yes, that's the thing, that there is Tolkien experts because of how so big and intricate his world is, that you need those kind of people. So why would you not want to write in that? Well, let me explain. Across time, of course, because Middle-earth is so good, such an amazing world, it has become known as what you would call the stereotypical fantasy world. Elves, men, dwarves, dragons, hobbits, etc., all living on one big continent with multiple different races and species and different ways of living. Everything is different. You have, the usual magic, and then you have dragons, you have good guys, you have bad guys. It's a very classic fantasy world, or at least it has become a very classic fantasy world in the last, say, 8 years or so since The Lord of the Rings came out. So I think that the issue with that when it comes to being a new writer is you want to write in a world that is your own. You want it to make it completely different, not completely different, but different to the usual fantasy world, the stereotypical fantasy world, and make something that will draw your reader in, make your world more compelling, make it stand out from the rest. Because especially when you are writing, of course, a new fantasy tale and you're a new author, if that's what you're doing, then of course you need to make your work stand out. If you want to attract more attention, if you want to attract a bigger audience, then you need to make your work stand out. And the way to do that would not be just through the story, but by investing people into the story, into the plot, through creating a world for the story to reside in that is different, that is something entirely, not entirely, but somewhat unique, to get people really, really interested in it and to really catch their eye, I guess you could say. Because, and of course this isn't a bad thing, if you want to write in a world like Tolkien's, like, your classic fantasy world, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Of course, some people like that. I just feel like myself, if you want to be writing and you're a new author and you're doing your world building, it's very important to do something a bit slightly different. And some people, they love that classic fantasy vibe that Tolkien's work gives off, that aesthetic. It's all great stuff, but you got the dark fantasy side and you got the light fantasy, high fantasy side of it, I guess you would say, with the elves, but then you've got Moria and the trolls and the dwarves, and it creates this really compelling world, of course, to visit, but of course it is used a lot. And you've got a lot of examples, of course, some that are very relevant now. We've got the Wheel of Time, which of course was was made into. Then, of course, you've got, for example, The Wheel of Time, which was made into an Amazon TV series. That's a very classic, I guess, kind of fantasy world that you could go with. The Witcher, despite its more dark fantasy aesthetic, but then also same with the Game of Thrones and the Elder Scrolls series, in these very classic fantasy worlds, with these maps that are kind of similar to the one that we see of Middle-earth. It's just your classic fantasy map. All these extremely similar fantasy worlds, honestly, separated by just a few key details which might not even be clear on the surface. So that's, of course, where my point comes in. When you want to get your reader to help them escape to a foreign fantasy land with a mixture of different races and creatures and species, you should make something different, do something different. And of course, this doesn't just necessarily have to be restricted to standard fantasy. Perhaps you're writing maybe in a dystopian thriller similar to The Hunger Games, Divergent, The Maze Runner, all great stories. Well, cool, maybe you want there to be a similar fight to the death arena, I guess, like you have in the Hunger Games, but you need to make the world different, do something different in it to attract people so that they want to see more of this new universe that you have attracted them to. Make the world yours, I guess, is the best way to say it, and the best way to do that is to start through creating an original, different kind of setting of universe that will immediately suck the reader into this new experience. And there is so much that you can do. One particular idea that I do like is, for example, this is just a completely random example that I came up with. Say, in your new fantasy world, at the beginning of time, there was a war between the gods, and in their wrath and greed waged a war against each other, with gods taking different sides, with one fatal moment resulting in all gods being struck down dead. And then they all went on to the inhabitants of the earth. Maybe men, maybe not, whatever you want. But let's say that the gods died and their ashes came down into the earth, giving the men magic. That's just a really random thing. But that could work, because then all people in this world have magic. Then in the day the story takes place, the modern day that the story takes place in, everyone or most people have these magical abilities, which in this new age are being used for perhaps something else, perhaps not a good purpose. Perhaps your story revolves around an anomaly, born with no capability for magic at all, and they have to survive in this kind of world, whose race, species is completely devoid, and he is the only one devoid of magic in his entire race or species. That could work, maybe something like that, but it's different. It's definitely something different that you could try, and that is in my entire point. If you want to create your own story, your own world building, that's fine. Do it like Tolkien. Honestly, his is one of the greatest examples. Of course it is. But what I would advise is, if you are a new author and you want to create your own fantasy world to make it for yourself, this would be the best way to do it. Create something different. Don't perhaps write in a world like Tolkien with all these races and species that are very similar in this classic fantasy. Do something different. And maybe you just don't want to listen to my advice at all. Honestly, that is fine. I am not a professional fantasy author or anything like that. Like, do not take me up on my word. This is just some advice that I would give. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm waffling on and I have no idea what I'm on about, but that's really all I have to say on it. But anyways, that's the end of today's video. Make sure to like the video, of course, if you want to see more perhaps writing advice, I guess you could say it is. And yeah, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Darth Sauron.